her breath caught in her throat as the church erupted in stunned silence. The aching curve of her belly, proof of a new life, was met not with kindness, but with the sharp heel of a woman dressed in white. The pregnant guest crumbled to the floor, her hand pressed against the While the groom's life was polished and protected, hers had been shaped by silence, sacrifice, and secrets she did not create. The pregnant woman who now stood at the center of whispers in that cathedral had grown up far from marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Her childhood was marked not by abundance, but by absence. She had been the hidden child, born from an affair her father spent a lifetime denying. For years she believed she was simply unlucky, abandoned without reason, left to wonder why her life looked so different from the children who walked to school with clean shoes and carried shiny lunchboxes. Her mother never spoke his name, never revealed the truth, only saying, "Some people would rather forget what they cannot control." Those words echoed in her memory long after her mother passed away. She carried them through long nights working double shifts to pay for textbooks, through the loneliness of never quite belonging, and through the quiet determination that one day she would build a life on her own terms, a life no one could erase. She fought her way through school, her resolve carrying her further than anyone expected. Scholarships and part-time jobs kept her afloat, but there was no safety net, no family wealth waiting to catch her if she failed. Still, she pushed forward, refusing to be defined by the mistakes of parents who had hidden her existence. By her late 20s, she had achieved what many thought impossible. She had secured a career, stability, and even the respect of those who once doubted her. Yet despite her success, she remained private, guarding her life like a fortress. Trust did not come easily. She learned early that promises could be broken, that those who swore loyalty could vanish without warning. It was perhaps for this reason that when she finally allowed someone into her life, she gave more than she should have, believing she had found the rare person who would not betray her. But betrayal has a way of finding those who least deserve it. The man she trusted left when she needed him most, his words ringing hollow when he swore he would stand by her. And now she carried his child, alone, bracing herself for the weight of responsibility that seemed heavier with each passing day. Yet the child growing inside her was not just another life. In her heart she knew she carried something greater, something that bound her not only to her unborn child, but also to a past she had never fully uncovered. She carried the truth of who she was, and whether she wanted it or not, that truth would soon rise to the surface. It was a truth powerful enough to change the course of a family that once denied her, a truth that could shatter the carefully constructed image of wealth and power her father's world depended upon. She carried more than a child. She carried the revelation that bloodlines cannot be buried forever, and secrets, no matter how deeply hidden, have a way of finding the light. It happened on an afternoon that neither of them could have predicted, a meeting born not of planning, but of chance. The groom had been invited to attend a charity fundraiser organized at a local hospital, one of those events where wealthy families gathered to write checks and pose for photographs, each seeking to outshine the other with gestures of generosity. He walked through the corridors, polished shoes clicking against the tile, shaking hands, offering smiles, fulfilling yet another duty expected of him. But it was there, among the bustle of nurses, volunteers, and patients, that he first noticed her. She wasn't dressed in wealth or adorned with diamonds. She wore a simple blouse and a name tag that looked out of place in such a formal setting. And yet, something about her presence unsettled him. She carried herself with quiet strength, her gaze steady, her words soft but deliberate when she spoke to those around her. For reasons he could not explain, he found his eyes drawn to her, following her every movement as though searching for an answer hidden in her face. He had seen beauty before, endless beauty displayed at galas and weddings, but hers was different. Hers felt familiar in a way that made his chest tighten, as if she carried the echo of a memory he had never fully grasped. He approached her, not as a man seeking attention but as someone trying to solve a puzzle that refused to leave his mind. Their conversation began casually, with the kind of politeness expected in such settings. She thanked him for attending. He nodded in return. But then there was a pause, one that lingered just long enough for something deeper to surface. He studied her carefully, the curve of her smile, the light in her eyes, and before he could stop himself, the words escaped. "You remind me of someone I once dreamed about." His voice trembled with a sincerity he rarely allowed himself to show. For a moment she held his gaze, and though her heart raced, she chose her words with calm precision. "Dreams have a way of coming true when you least expect it," she replied, her tone carrying more weight than he could comprehend. He smiled faintly, unaware of the layers hidden within her answer, unaware that what he dismissed as coincidence was in fact the echo of bloodlines intertwined long before either of them had spoken a word. In that moment, standing in the sterile brightness of a hospital hallway, surrounded by flowers delivered for sick children and the distant sound of a piano playing in the lobby, they felt an unspoken connection. Neither of them knew why, and neither dared to question it openly. To him, she was simply a stranger who left an impression he couldn't shake. To her, he was the polished man whose world had once cast her aside. Yet even as they parted ways that day, both carried with them a quiet unease, a sense that this encounter was not the end, but the beginning of something that would reach into the heart of everything they thought they knew. Neither of them knew the devastating truth about their bloodline connection, a truth that would soon collide with their lives in ways neither could escape. The day of the wedding arrived draped in extravagance, a spectacle carefully designed to leave an impression on every guest who walked through the grand doors. The bride's suite buzzed with activity as stylists adjusted curls, pinned veils, and dusted shimmering powder across her skin. Around her, bridesmaids whispered, their laughter carrying undertones of curiosity and envy. They spoke of the groom's wealth, his family's reputation, and the kind of life the bride was stepping into, though few mentioned love. In the corners of the room, champagne glasses clinked while silk dresses rustled as women leaned close to one another, repeating the same thought in different words: that she was clever, that she knew exactly what she was doing. For the bride, every detail mattered, from the lace that trailed across the floor to the sparkle of the jewels around her neck. She looked into the mirror not with nerves, but with satisfaction, whispering to herself that this was the moment she had been building toward, the moment that would cement her place not only beside her husband, but within the world of influence she had long desired. The veil was not just fabric, it was armor. The ring waiting on her finger was not only a promise, it was a prize. In the church below, guests settled into pews, their conversations carrying through the high ceilings in soft echoes. Some admired the floral arrangements that spilled from golden vases, others marveled at the string quartet playing softly near the altar. Yet beneath the admiration was a current of speculation. Everyone knew this marriage meant more than a union of two hearts. It was the merging of power, wealth, and legacy. Smiles were exchanged, compliments whispered, but the anticipation carried a sharp edge, as if those gathered knew that behind every perfect facade lay truths unspoken. The groom stood steady, though his eyes betrayed the quiet storm within. He had learned to hide discomfort behind practiced charm, but as the doors prepared to open, he couldn't shake the strange weight that pressed on him. Something about this day, this union, carried a heaviness he couldn't name. If you're still watching, I know you're hooked, so tap that like button so we can keep sharing stories like this. Guests rose to their feet as the music swelled, the bride stepping forward, her gown sweeping against the floor like a tide reclaiming the shore. The cameras flashed, and the air grew still, everyone watching the couple who seemed destined for grandeur. But this wedding would not go as planned. The vows had just begun when the air in the cathedral shifted. The groom lifted his hand to take the bride's, his voice steady though his heart trembled with unease, when suddenly the heavy doors at the back of the church swung open with a thunderous echo that silenced even the music. Heads turned, whispers rose, and then gasps rippled through the rows of guests as a heavily pregnant woman stepped into the aisle. She looked weary, her face pale from the weight she carried, but her eyes were fixed on the altar with a resolve that refused to bend. Each step she took forward deepened the shock, her presence cutting through the perfect illusion that had been so carefully constructed. Murmurs grew louder, some voices questioning who she was, others already spinning stories of scandal. The bride's lips curled into a sharp line, her hand tightening around her bouquet, and without hesitation she stepped forward from the altar, heels striking the floor like warning bells. The silence fractured as the bride's voice rang out across the hall, sharp enough to pierce the air. "Who are you, and what do you think you're doing here?" she demanded, her tone carrying not only anger but a hint of fear, as if she already sensed this woman was more than an unwelcome guest. The pregnant woman's voice trembled, but held firm. "I came to tell you the truth about him," she said, her hand pressing against her belly as though shielding both herself and the child within. The words sent another wave of whispers crashing through the crowd. Guests leaned toward one another, eyes wide, searching for meaning in the tension that now gripped the room. The groom stood frozen, his expression unreadable, caught between the woman he had promised to marry and the one who now threatened to shatter every secret he had buried. The bride's composure cracked. Rage flashed in her eyes as she stepped closer, towering over the woman as if proximity alone could erase her presence. "How dare you walk into my wedding?" she spat, the sharpness in her voice echoing against the stone walls. Without warning, her heel struck, driving into the stomach of the woman who had dared to speak. The sound of the impact was followed by a collective cry, the kind that comes when horror grips a crowd and disbelief collides with outrage. The pregnant woman fell to her knees, her hands clutching desperately at her belly, her face contorted in pain as tears welled in her eyes. For a moment the church was chaos, shouts rising, guests moving to stand, some rushing forward while others recoiled in shock. The bride stood guard above her, chest heaving, as though violence had been her only defense against the fear that truth might ruin her. And then, just as the noise reached its peak, one voice broke through it all, clear, steady, and devastating. "Stop!" it cried, silencing the room. "That's his sister!" The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, silencing every gasp and every murmur. "That's his sister!" For a moment, no one moved. The bride's hand froze mid-gesture, her eyes wide with disbelief, while the groom stood utterly still, as though the floor beneath him had vanished. And then, like pieces of a puzzle long hidden in the shadows, the truth began to take shape. The whispers that had followed his family for decades, the arguments behind closed doors, the fragments of conversations he was never meant to hear, all of it pointed to this moment. A flashback rose in his mind, sharp and unrelenting, his father's voice years ago, cold and commanding. "There was a mistake, and it was dealt with. No one will ever know. Do you understand?" At the time, he had been too young to grasp the weight of those words, but now, standing in the church with the woman before him, he understood everything. His father's affair, the child born in secrecy, and the silence that had been enforced at all costs, this was the truth they had buried, the truth they hoped would never surface. The guests erupted into hushed exchanges, their whispers bouncing from pew to pew like echoes of judgment. "His sister?" some muttered in disbelief. How could this be hidden for so long? The bride's face drained of color, her carefully painted smile collapsing under the weight of humiliation. She looked not only at the pregnant woman, but at her groom, as if she could not decide whether to feel betrayed by him or terrified of the family secrets that had just dismantled her perfect day. The groom's eyes filled with tears as he staggered toward the woman kneeling in the aisle, his voice breaking as he fell to his knees beside her. "All this time," he whispered, his words trembling with regret, "all this time, you're my sister, and I let you suffer alone." The confession cracked something deep inside him, The years of loyalty to a family who had deceived him colliding with the sudden unbearable knowledge that he had turned his back on the very person who shared his blood. The bride's jewels sparkled under the light, but her face betrayed nothing but horror, while the guests sat stunned, torn between pity, anger, and disbelief. The perfect wedding had dissolved into something no one could have predicted, a reckoning that exposed not only the truth of a hidden affair, but the fragile facade of a family built on lies. The weight of the revelation crashed down on the room, and in that silence, the bride's face twisted into something unrecognizable. Humiliation burned in her cheeks as whispers multiplied around her, guests shaking their heads, others holding their hands to their mouths in disbelief. She had built her entire future on this day, on the image of perfection and power, and now that image lay shattered at her feet. With a sharp cry of rage, she threw her bouquet to the ground, the petals scattering across the marble floor, and stormed out of the church. The long train of her gown dragged behind her like a torn flag of surrender as she pushed open the doors and disappeared into the daylight. The gasps of the crowd followed her exit, but no one dared call her back. The guests turned their eyes once more to the woman still kneeling in the aisle, her hand cradling her belly, her strength remarkable in the face of so much pain. Voices began to rise, divided and sharp. Some looked upon her with pity, whispering to one another that she had been wronged all her life and deserved compassion at last. Others condemned the family outright, murmuring that wealth built on lies can never stand, that no empire can hide a truth forever. And still there were those who struggled to accept it, their loyalty to the groom's family wrestling with the undeniable evidence before their eyes. The groom sat beside her, his shoulders heavy, unable to look away from the woman he now knew was his sister. And then, through the storm of judgment and the ache of betrayal, her voice rose, steady, despite the tears glistening on her cheeks. "I didn't come to ruin a wedding," she said softly, the words carrying across the hushed pews. "I came for the truth." Her declaration silenced the room, a reminder that her presence was not vengeance but survival, not malice, but a desperate need to no longer live unseen. And so the question lingers, one that cannot be easily answered. If you were her, if you carried her burdens, would you find it in your heart to forgive, or would you walk away forever? One secret destroyed a wedding, but it also uncovered the truth. A truth that had been hidden for decades, guarded by silence, buried beneath the weight of wealth and pride. Yet no matter how carefully families try to erase the past, it has a way of finding its voice, and when it does, it changes everything. The bride left humiliated, her dreams of status slipping through her hands like sand. The groom, once the polished image of obedience, was forced to confront not only his parents' lies but his own blindness to the pain of another. And the sister, broken yet unbowed, proved that truth, even when painful, is the only foundation strong enough to outlast betrayal. Sometimes the past refuses to stay buried, and when it resurfaces, it does not simply reveal, it transforms. So now the question falls to you. Whose side are you on, the bride, the groom, or the sister? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And don't forget to subscribe. The next story will leave you even more stunned.